the heart of Alaska's unforgiving wilderness, where the wind howled like a chorus of restless spirits, Elias Kane lived alone in a weathered log cabin perched precariously on the edge of a frozen valley. A grizzled hunter with frost woven into his beard and eyes that held the weight of countless winters, Elias was no ordinary man. He revered the wild, believing every creature carried a soul etched with its own unspoken story. His cabin, built by his own hands from spruce and cedar, stood as a solitary sanctuary in a world that devoured the weak. Its walls, scarred by years of storms, creaked under the weight of snow, but the fire within burned fierce, a beacon against the endless cold. On a brutal winter night in 2025, a blizzard descended with apocalyptic fury, transforming the valley into a white void. Snow lashed the cabin's shutters, and the temperature plummeted to a bone-chilling -40 degrees Fahrenheit, a cold so deep it could steal breath from lungs. As Elias stoked the fire, coaxing flames from dwindling logs, a faint, desperate cry pierced the storm's relentless roar. It wasn't the wind's wail, but a sound of life clinging to hope, fragile and fading. Heart pounding, he pressed his ear to the frost-crusted door. The cry came again, weaker, more urgent, like a plea from the edge of oblivion. Bundling himself in layers of furs, Elias yanked open the door, the hinges groaning against the gale. Through the swirling snow, a shape emerged, a massive polar bear, her once pristine fur caked with ice, staggering toward him. Clutched against her heaving chest were 3 tiny cubs, no bigger than house cats, their bodies trembling, eyes half-frozen shut beneath lids crusted with frost. The mother's gaze locked onto Elias, not with the ferocity of a predator, but with a raw, wordless desperation that transcended species. Her legs buckled, and she swayed, her strength draining into the snow. They were dying, and she knew it. Elias's mind raced. Polar bears were apex predators, capable of crushing a man's skull with a single swipe. Every instinct screamed to slam the door, to save himself. Yet, as the mother's eyes held his, pleading in silence, he saw something he couldn't ignore. A mother's love, fighting to save her children. "Come on, then," he whispered, his breath clouding in the frigid air. He swung the door wide, a reckless act of mercy that could cost him his life. To his astonishment, the bear understood. Dragging her cubs, she lumbered inside, her massive paws thudding against the wooden floor. She collapsed near the hearth, her body shielding her young from the lingering cold. Elias moved with cautious urgency, piling every blanket and fur he owned to create a warm nest around the bears. The cubs whimpered, their tiny bodies curling into their mother's side as steam rose from their thawing fur, filling the cabin with the scent of wet hide. He placed a chipped ceramic bowl of water and a pile of dried salmon, a meager offering from his winter stores, a safe distance away, careful not to provoke the mother. Then, retreating to a shadowed corner, he gripped his hunting knife, its blade glinting in the firelight. It was a futile defense against a beast that could kill him in an instant, but it steadied his nerves. The mother's eyes followed him, wary but calm, as if she sensed his intent was not to harm. Her breathing slowed, and she licked her cubs gently, coaxing faint squeaks from their thawing bodies. All night, Elias kept vigil, unable to tear his gaze from the surreal scene. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows across the bear's massive form, her fur glowing like moonlit snow. The cubs stirred, nuzzling closer to their mother, who enveloped them in her warmth. Elias's mind churned. What kind of fool invites death into his home? Had he lost his sanity to the solitude of the wild? Yet, as the storm raged outside, rattling the cabin's walls, a strange peace settled over the room, as if the wild itself had paused to honor this fragile truce. Morning broke, and the blizzard retreated, leaving a world of blinding white. Sunlight streamed through the cabin's frosted windows, painting the bears in a golden glow. They slept soundly, the cubs nestled against their mother's flank, their tiny chests rising and falling. Elias crept toward the door, intending to let them leave before instinct reclaimed them. But as his hand touched the iron latch, the mother stirred, and something unthinkable happened. She rose, her massive frame towering over him, and let out a low, rumbling call, not a growl, but a summons. The cubs scrambled to their feet, shaking off sleep, and to Elias's shock, the mother nudged them toward him with her snout. One cub, bolder than its siblings, waddled forward, its black eyes gleaming with curiosity. It pressed its wet nose against Elias's calloused hand, then, to his disbelief, flicked out a tiny pink tongue and licked his fingers. Elias froze, his breath catching in his throat. This wasn't possible. Polar bears didn't trust humans. They feared or fought them. His heart pounded as the cub nuzzled closer, its warmth seeping through his skin. The mother stepped forward, her massive head lowering until her eyes met his. In that moment, Elias felt something ancient, a connection that reached beyond words, beyond species, into the marrow of existence. It was as if the wild itself had looked into his soul and found him worthy. With a soft huff, the mother turned and led her cubs outside, her paws leaving deep prints in the fresh snow. Elias followed, expecting them to vanish into the vast white expanse. Instead, they lingered near the cabin, lounging in the sun as if claiming it as their own. The cubs tumbled over each other, batting at snowflakes, while the mother lay watchful, her gaze never straying far from Elias. He stood in the doorway, marveling at the impossible scene. The next morning, he found something that made his blood run cold, a massive Arctic char, its scales glinting like polished silver, placed deliberately on his doorstep. He scanned the horizon and saw her, the mother bear, standing on a distant ridge, her silhouette framed against the dawn. Her gaze held no threat, only a profound gratitude that shook Elias to his core. His knees buckled, and he sank to the porch, clutching the fish. A predator had left him an offering, a gesture so alien to the laws of the wild that it felt like a miracle. For weeks, the bears stayed close, weaving themselves into the rhythm of Elias's solitary life. They never attacked, never scavenged his supplies. The cubs played in the snow, their antics drawing rare smiles from Elias, while the mother kept a vigilant eye, her presence both protector and sentinel. Villagers, hearing whispers of the tale, braved the treacherous paths to see for themselves. They stood at a distance, gaping at the bears lounging near the cabin, and dubbed Elias the Bear Whisperer, their voices a mix of awe and disbelief. Some swore he'd made a pact with the spirits of the tundra. Others whispered he was mad, driven to delusion by isolation. Elias kept the truth locked in like a treasure in his heart, sharing it only with the wind that carried their story across the valley. But as spring's first thaw softened the snow, the bears grew restless, their behavior shifting in ways Elias couldn't explain. The mother paced restlessly, her cubs trailing behind, casting furtive glances at the cabin. At dusk, she approached the door and let out a deep, mournful sound that vibrated through the air. Elias stepped outside, his heart racing, sensing a change he couldn't name. The mother stared at him, her eyes glinting with an intelligence that defied reason. Then, rearing up on her hind legs, she towered nearly 10 feet tall, and, impossibly, she spoke. Not in words, but in a voice that echoed in Elias's mind, clear as a bell. You saved us. Now we save you." Before he could grasp the surreal moment, she dropped to all fours and charged into the forest, her cubs racing after her like shadows. Seconds later, a deafening crack shattered the silence. Elias turned to see a wall of snow roaring down the mountainside, an avalanche, unleashed by the warming thaw, hurtling toward his cabin with unstoppable force. He had no time to run, no time to think. But before the snow could swallow him, the bears burst from the trees. The mother slammed into him, her massive body knocking him onto her back as she sprinted from the avalanche's path. The cubs flanked them, dodging falling debris with uncanny precision, their small bodies weaving through the chaos. When the snow settled, Elias was alive, sprawled in a clearing half a mile from his buried cabin. The bears stood around him, unharmed, their breath steaming in the twilight. The mother's eyes met his one final time, and her voice resonated in his mind once more. "We are even." With a final glance, she led her cubs into the wilderness, their forms fading into the dusk like ghosts, leaving only silence in their wake. Elias never saw them again. His cabin was gone, crushed beneath the snow, but he rebuilt, board by board, carrying the story in his heart like a sacred relic. The villagers, stunned by his survival, spread the tale far and wide, from whispered fireside stories to distant towns. Scientists scoffed, dismissing it as a hallucination born of trauma and hypothermia. But those who looked into Elias's eyes saw something unshakable, a man forever changed by a bond that defied the laws of nature. The story of the man who sheltered the frozen bears became a legend, a testament to the miracles forged by kindness in the wild's cruel heart. On quiet nights, when the wind whispered through the valley, Elias stood at his new doorstep, gazing into the darkness. He swore he heard a distant rumble, the voice of a mother bear, watching over him still, her gratitude woven into the stars above.